Welcome to our lecture on the horse colors and patterns. So horses come in a wide variety of coat colors, ranging from saturated dark shades to soft dilutions, with either matte or glossy coats, and also many different patterns and markings scattered throughout the body. So in this presentation, we are going to define and identify what are the different horse colors as well as the color patterns, and we are also going to discuss what are the science behind these colors and patterns. How coat colors are produced and why do we need to study coat colors? So distinctive coloration is very much valued in horses, and buyers will easily pay a higher price for an attractive colored coat. Usually, the colors with greater visual appeal and higher market value originate from specific combinations of genes. So the coat colors are formed by combining certain genes that produce a particular coat color and pattern. So to be able to understand how this works, we should consider each gene as a layer, one on top of another, and observe each new layer's effects on the resulting coat color. In this diagram, you can see an example of how each layer of the genes affects the horse's coat. And we have here, the final outcome is the Palomino Pinto. So it is said that although there are only a handful of color genes, they can be expressed in many different combinations and therefore originate a wide variety of color patterns. So in this diagram, you have here the presence of the different genes in the horses. Now, for example, we have the extension gene, the cream gene, the Tobiano, and the splash white gene. So each of this gene will affect the horse's coat color, and also um, it will also dictate the color patterns that are present in the horse. For example, we have here for example the extension gene. For the extension gene here, of course, the extension gene is the gene that is responsible for expressing the black color in horses, so that in the absence of the extension gene, it leaves the coat, the mane. So this portion here is the mane. We have also the tail as red. We also have the cream gene. So for example, when we are going to have the cream gene plus the extension gene, the action of one copy of the cream gene will dilute the red base color to gold. So from red color here, now the color of the coat becomes gold in the presence of the cream gene. And the third layer of the gene here is the Tobiano gene. So the action of the Tobiano gene will remove the pigment from the parts of the coat. So we have here a gold color coat that is present in this horse, having a cream gene and an absent extension gene. When you are going to have a Tobiano gene, so what will happen is that the Tobiano gene will remove the pigment from the parts of the coat, so resulting here in the presence of the coat with no pigment or white in color. When we are going to have the splash gene together with the Tobiano cream gene and the extension gene, what will happen is the action of the splash white gene will remove the pigment from the other parts of the coat, resulting to a greater area here with white portion of the coat. So understanding the color genetics is very important, particularly for breeders of horses. Um, the of course, for the breeders of horses, they are seeking to produce a particular color. And with the knowledge on the color genetics, they can decide which horses they can mate in order to produce foals with the desired coat color. So again, for the breeders of the horses, what they are after for is that they will be able not to produce a foal with the desired coat color, because again, the presence of the distinctive colors in the horses can command a higher price. So it is more valued. Horses with a distinct coat color are more valued, particularly by buyers. Another another very important aspect why producers or breeders need to understand the color genetics is for them to avoid colors that are not acceptable for registration in certain breeds. So, for example, the breed Cleveland Bay must be bay in color in order for it to be registered. The the breed Frisians must be black in color in order for it to be registered. And we also have, for example, the Suffolk Punches. It must be chestnut in color in order for it to be registered as that particular breed. Another important aspect is to avoid potential health issues associated with some color gene mutations. An example of this is the lethal white gene mutation. So what is this lethal white gene mutation? So the lethal white gene mutation is a genetic mutation that affects horses with white markings. And when this happens, when there is the presence of this genetic mutation, what will happen is it can lead to death of the foals. Foals with the two copies of this gene are born white with blue eyes and have intestines that don't fully develop. So this type of horses is not recommended to be bred anymore. So some basics of horse color genetics can help us understand why our horses have the coat color they have. So this is very important also in order for us to be able to know what color to expect in foals when mares and stallions are mated. We can also determine how to increase the chances of a particular color, and we can be aware of how to avoid colors that are not desirable or even have health risks associated with it. So before we are going to discuss the different colors of the horses, let us first have an overview of the basics of the horse color genetics. So the body of the horse is made up of trillions of cells. These are, of course, microscopic structures and are considered to be the basic unit of the living organisms. So there exist different types of cells in the horse's body. For example, we have the bone cell, the muscle cell, the skin cells, the blood cells, the nerve cells, and so on and so forth. So within the cell is a nucleus. Each cell has a nucleus as shown in this diagram. And this is where 64 chromosomes of the horse exist. So within the nucleus, we can find within it now the presence of the 64 chromosomes. And that is a characteristic for horses. There are, of course, chromosomes comes in pairs, so that there are 32 inherited from the sire and 32 inherited from the dam. Of course, when we say sire, it's the male parent, and of course, that is a stallion, and for the dam, that is the mare. So chromosomes are contained within the nucleus, and chromosome is a rod-like body made up of DNA tightly coiled like a noodle. The chromosomes hold the genetic information together, protecting it from getting tangled and damaged. So that is one of the major functions of the chromosome. It contains the DNA, it holds the genetic information, and protects that genetic information from being damaged. So the chromosomes contains the DNA. The DNA contains the genetic information, and it consists of long chains of nucleotides coiled into a double helix. So this is the diagram of the double helix structure of our DNA. Again, it is twisted like a ladder. So the sequence of nucleotides in the DNA determines the genetic code. How about the gene, and where can we find the gene? So when we say gene, that is the basic physical and functional unit of heredity. So when we are going to write now the genes, they are usually represented by letters, a combination of letters and numbers. Where can we find the gene? So the gene is a segment of the DNA. So as you can see in this diagram, the gene is found in the DNA itself. It is found in this double helix structure of the DNA in this segment of the DNA. Of course, the gene contains the information for a specific trait of the animal that is being passed from the parent to the offspring. A single strand of DNA contains thousands of genes. Another important terminology is the term locus. So basically, pag sinabi nating locus, this is from the name itself, it is the location. It is the address. No? The address or the location of a gene in the chromosome. So it is the specific location of the gene in the chromosome. So in this case, this is the location of this particular gene in the chromosome. So this is the structure is a chromosome, and this portion here is the gene, and that particular location is known as the locus. Of course, pag plural, no, it is loci. Often, the locus name is used when referring to a gene. So another very important terminology is the alleles. So what is an allele? Allele is basically the alternative version of a gene. So since chromosomes come in pairs, each horse carries two alleles at a particular locus. One allele is inherited from the male parent and one from the female parent. So this is our chromosome, and it contains the allele for a particular gene. And in this case, we have the E, or the extension gene. So one of this gene is inherited from the sire, or the male parent, and one of this gene is inherited, one of the version, or the alternative version of our E extension gene is the lowercase e gene, which comes from the dam, or the female parent. So again, a gene can have a different variations, and these variations can be dominant or recessive. So therefore, yung ating gene, it can be dominant or recessive. So pag yung gene ay dominant, in this case, yung ating extension gene, the gene E, it is usually written as an uppercase. And of course, pag recessive naman yung gene, that is represented in a small letter or in lowercase letters. So an allele is responsible for the physical traits, whether these traits can be seen or not. So for example, yung ating extension gene, it is responsible for the expression of the black color. So since this is a dominant gene, so this is expressed, so this will be expressed in the offspring. And of course, ito naman yung ating lowercase na extension gene, it is considered to be a recessive trait. So pag since this dam has a recessive gene for the extension gene, so hindi na i-express yung black color, and leaving the default color to be red or chestnut. So again, pag sinabi nating allele, it is the alternative version of a gene. So usually the genes are written in letters, the letters of the alphabet. So for example, yung ating letters ng alphabet, di ba meron siyang uppercase at saka lowercase. For example, the letter E, meron siyang a capital letter, meron din siyang small letter. So parang ganun din yung ating gene. It has an alternative version because sabi nga, di ba yung ating of course, yung ating chromosome, it comes in pairs, and one part of the chromosome comes from the parent, from the male parent, and one part of that comes from the female parent. So meron tayong version from the dam, meron din tayong version from the sire. Another important terminology is the homozygous. When an organism has two identical alleles or two copies of the same allele, it is said to be homozygous for that particular gene. So let's consider, for example, the extension gene. The extension gene determines if a horse is black or red. So yung ating allele, it can be dominant or recessive. Yung isang allele, it comes from the male parent, yung isa naman comes from the female parent. In this particular chromosome, yung ating extension gene is said to be homozygous dominant. Now again, because it contains both identical copies of our extension gene, which are dominant. Again, they are written as uppercase. A chestnut horse or a red horse is homozygous recessive for the gene for this particular extension gene. Now, so again, pag recessive, it is written in lowercase letters. So this allele here is contributed from the sire. The other one naman is contributed from the dam. And since they have identical sila na recessive, so this is considered to be a homozygous recessive for the extension gene. We also have the heterozygous. If an organism carries one copy of each allele, it is considered to be heterozygous. For example, a phenotypically black horse may be heterozygous for the extension gene. So yung isang allele ay dominant, isa naman ay recessive. So it will produce a black horse. Another very important terminology is that genotype. So pag sinabi nating genotype, that refers to the genetic makeup of the organism or the organism's complete set of genes. Now, a genotype is the genetic makeup of a trait consisting of a specific combination of alleles. So for example, there are three possible genotypes for the extension gene, and they are homozygous dominant for the extension gene, heterozygous, and the homozygous recessive for the extension gene. So in this diagram or in this particular example, yung ating example here is the extension gene and their expression. And the particular trait that we are after for is of course the coat color. So pag yung ating extension gene is switched off, or pag yung ating horse contains yung the genotype ng ating horse ay homozygous recessive for the extension gene, so yung kanyang coat color ay magiging red. Pag yung ating pag yung ating horse, pag yung kanyang genotype ay homozygous dominant at saka heterozygous for the extension gene, so ibig sabihin yung ating extension gene ay switched on, kaya yung coat color ng ating horse ay magiging black. So, ibig sabihin na yung ating extension gene is instrumental for allowing black pigment to be expressed. Another very important terminology is the phenotype. So, phenotype is the characteristic of an animal that can be seen or measured. For example, we have the color, the height, the speed, and so on. So other phenotypic traits include observable traits such as the weight, for example, the eye color, the hair color, the horn size, the hoof color, and others. So again, alleles can be expressed in different ways. It can be dominant, recessive, and incomplete dominant. So we have here a comparison of our genotype and phenotype and their characteristic. Now when we are going to compare the two. So this is our genotype. Now for this particular genotype, as we can see here, this is a recessive trait. This is a homozygous recessive for the cream allele. So this will produce, for example, a chestnut color. A horse with that is heterozygous for the cream allele or the cream gene will produce a palomino horse. And yung ating cremelo naman na horses have a genotype of homozygous for the dominant cream allele. So yun siya yung ating example of our phenotype. So of course, pag sinabi nating phenotype in this diagram, it is the color, the coat color that we have considered. And pag sinabi nating specific, no? Specific naman na phenotype, these are the chestnut. No? It is a phenotypic trait. Now we have the palomino and the cremello. We have here an example of our genotype and phenotype for our coat color, as well as the color of our, for example, no, yung ating the points of the horse, the mane, the tail, at saka yung ating ears. No? So again, there are three major types of coat color for horses. We have the bay, the black, and the chestnut. Pag chestnut, it is reddish brown to brown. Pag bay naman, it is reddish to brown pa rin siya, pero meron siyang black points sa kanyang mane, sa tail, and sa ears. So, ayun. So what is the possible genotype of a bay horse? So yung ating bay horse, so again we go back to our the genes. Now we have the bay, the black, and the chestnut color is controlled by two types of genes. We have the extension gene, ito siya yung ating E here. And we also have the agouti, AGOUTI, the agouti gene, which is determines where the black color will appear on the horse. So those locations of the black color points will be the mane, the tail, and the ear edges. So yung location kung saan mag-appear yung black points will be determined by the agouti gene. Tapos yung ating extension gene naman, siya naman yung mag-determine whether a horse is color black or whether it is color red. So halimbawa, pag dominant yung ating, pag meron tayong dominant na allele ng extension gene, so yung ating horse ay black. Pag homozygous recessive naman siya for the extension gene, it is red in color. So halimbawa, no, meron tayong homozygous dominant allele for the extension gene at saka homozygous dominant allele for the agouti gene. So the horse will be bay in color. So pag bay, it is reddish brown. Tapos yung ating the mane, the tail, at saka ears are black, no, in color. Another genotype that will express a bay color or a bay phenotypic trait is pag yung ating extension gene ay heterozygous, tapos yung ating agouti gene ay dominant. Another is pag yung ating extension gene ay dominant, tapos yung ating agouti gene ay heterozygous. We also have the black color. So yung ating black color, may express siya pag yung ating genotype ay dominant, homozygous dominant yung ating extension gene, at saka pag yung ating agouti gene ay recessive, no? Homozygous recessive. Pag yung ating namang extension gene ay homozygous recessive, tapos yung ating agouti gene ay dominant, so yung ating phenotype ay magiging chestnut. Pwede rin na yung ating, pag yung ating extension gene ay homozygous recessive, then yung ating agouti gene ay heterozygous, so magiging chestnut din yung ating horse. So this is just an example of the different genotype or different allele combinations and the corresponding phenotypic traits that can be produced in horses. So, yung ating allele, it can be dominant, recessive, or incomplete dominant. So, what is the difference between the three? So, dominant alleles, so these are expressed even if the horse has only one copy of the allele. No, so again, pag sinabi nating dominant, it is usually written sa capital, no, capital letter siya. So, it means that kahit na yung ating allele ay meron lang siyang isang copy ng dominant allele, ay may express na yung characteristic of that particular allele. So that the heterozygous will look the same as homozygous. So, for example, horses will be black whether they have two copies of the black color allele or only one copy of the black color allele. So again, pag sinabi nating black color allele, that refers to our extension gene. So pag yung ating extension gene ay homozygous dominant, no, ibig sabihin, it contains both no, identical copies of the dominant extension gene, so magiging black no, yung ating horse. Pwede rin, maging black din yung horse pag yung ating genotype ay meron siyang kahit na isang copy ng ating dominant extension gene. So in this case, this is heterozygous for the extension gene. So isang copy lang ng black allele, tapos meron din siyang isang recessive na black allele ay black pa rin yung kulay ng horse. So yun yung concept of the dominant allele. So yung ating heterozygous genotype looks the same as the homozygous genotype. Black, na parehong black. How about the recessive alleles? So the recessive alleles are only expressed when the dominant allele is absent. So again, pag recessive allele, it is usually written in small letter. Pag dominant naman, it is capital letter. So only when the horse has two copies of the recessive allele. So halimbawa, meron tayo ditong chestnut or the red horse. So yung chestnut horse can only be produced when we have a genotype that is homozygous recessive. So ibig sabihin, yung ating two copies ng ating allele ay both recessive. So wala tayong copy ng dominant allele. No, they are both recessive. So yun lang, that is the time that the chestnut or the red color will be expressed. We have the concept of the incomplete dominant alleles. So incomplete dominant alleles have a dosage effect, i.e., they will express with more intensity as the more copies of the allele are present. So homozygous will be more intensely expressed than heterozygous. For example, the cream allele, that is written here as capital letter CR, on a red base coat has the effect of lightening the coat color. So ito yung tinatawag na diluting effect of this particular gene, no, yung lightening of the coat color. So we can explain the incomplete dominance with the example of the cream gene. So ito yung ating CR, no, CR gene on the chestnut color. So again, pag chestnut, it is red in color. So for example, now let's consider that the CR represents the non-dilution allele. So pag small letter, yung ating CR, that is the non-dilution allele. Pag capital letter naman, yung ating CR, that is the cream dilution allele. So ibig sabihin, it can dilute the color of our, for example, the coat, no, from the chestnut color to a light color. Yun yung diluting effect. We can have three possible genotypes. So these are the possible genotypes of our cream allele. We can have both, no, recessive cream allele. So we can have these, no, recessive pairs. We also have the heterozygous pair of our cream allele. So isa ay dominant, homozygous dominant. We also have the recessive one. And we can also have a combination that is both homozygous dominant, no, for the cream allele. So, of course, each one has a different trait, which means we can have three possible phenotypes. So, pag wala tayong, if there is no cream allele that is present, pag wala tayong dominant, no, na cream allele that is present, so what will happen is we have a genotype or phenotype that is chestnut in color. Ito yung ma-express na sa ating foal. If we only have one cream allele, so pag meron tayong isang dominant na cream allele, tapos kinumbine natin siya with a recessive, no, homozygous recessive na cream allele, so what will happen is we have a palomino na coat color. No? So again, pag palomino, it is like yung coat color niya is reddish gold, no, in color. So mas lighter siya compared to that of the chestnut. No? So there is dilution effect. Ito yung tinatawag dilution effect or the Latin effect. Tapos, of course, pag palomino, puti yung ating mane, the tail, at saka yung edges of the ears. But there is still some visible pigment, and the skin in the eyes retain the original color of the chestnut. That is for this palomino coat color. So therefore, we have a mixture of both traits now from the recessive na CR or the cream gene tapos dominant na cream gene. If two copies of the cream allele are present, no, ito yung ating dominant allele. So dominant yung ating cream allele tapos we are going to mix that with our dominant again na cream allele. We have a full dilution will be expressed, so the coat color will be lost and all the pigments will also be lost as shown in this diagram. So the skin, which is now pink, now and the eyes are blue. So this is the effect of our cream allele that is expressed as a diluting effect or a lightening effect on the coat color. For example, we have a red base color, tapos i-mix natin siya with the cream allele, so it can produce a diluting effect. So horse genetics explains the transmission of characteristics from sire and dams to their foal. A foal inherits half of its alleles from its dam and the other half from its sire. So it will have a combination of characteristics from both parents. We will exemplify how to use the Punnett Square with the extension gene, which determines if a horse is black or red or chestnut. So we have here an example of our Punnett Square. So Punnett Square is a genetic tool used to predict possible offspring based on the parents' different genotype. So pag yung ating parent are both dominant, meron siyang dominant allele, so of course it will produce a black foal, as shown in this diagram. Pag yung ating parent naman are could both have a genotype that is recessive, so magpuproduce naman siya ng red pigment or red foal. So this is another illustration of a Punnett square. So pag yung ating parent are both dominant, meron siyang dominant allele for the extension gene, so it will be black. Pag yung ating isang parent ay dominant, tapos yung ating isa naman ay recessive for the extension gene, so black pa rin siya. We also have here another example of our Punnett square, showing the yung ating extension gene to illustrate the coat color. So again, pag yung ating both of our parents contains the genotype that is recessive for the extension gene, so that is the time that it will produce a foal that is red or chestnut in color. So here another example of our Punnett square showing this is for the extension gene. So pag yung ating halimbawa yung ating dam, or rather yes, yung ating dam ay dominant for the extension gene, tapos yung ating sire naman ay recessive, so mag-produce siya ng black foal. The same is true for this concept here. Pag yung ating dam naman ay recessive for the extension gene, tapos we are going to mate that with a sire that is also recessive for the extension gene, so magkakaroon tayo na chestnut or red na foal. Of course, pag yung ating both of our parents, our dam and the sire are recessive for the extension gene, so magkakaroon tayo ng red pigment. There will be the production of the birth of the chestnut foal. So this diagram shows our inheritance chart. This is a chart that will be helpful in predicting the genotype, the phenotype of our horses when we are going to mate them according to the extension gene. So again, yung ating extension gene that determines whether a horse is black or red. Pag dominant, pag meron tayong dominant na allele sa ating genotype, it will produce a black horse. Pag meron tayong homozygous na recessive gene for the extension gene, so it will produce a red horse. So, for example, pag minate natin yung ating homozygous black to a homozygous black horse, so of course, there is a 100% na probability na yung ating foal ay magiging homozygous black din. Pag minate naman natin yung ating homozygous black sa ating heterozygous black, 50% chance that it will be heterozygous black, 50% chance that it will be homozygous black. Pag minate naman natin yung ating homozygous black sa ating homozygous red, there is a 50% chance that there is a 100% chance that it will be heterozygous black. When we are going to mate our heterozygous black with a heterozygous black, there is a 25% chance that the foal that will be produced is a homozygous red, 50% chance that it will be heterozygous black, and 25% chance that it will be homozygous black. When we are going to mate our heterozygous black with our homozygous red, there is a 50% chance that the foal that will be produced is homozygous red, 50% chance that it will be heterozygous black. When we are going to mate our homozygous red with our heterozygous black, there is a 50% chance that it will be heterozygous black, 50% chance that it will be homozygous red. When we are going to mate our homozygous red with our homozygous red, so there is a 100% chance that the foal that will be produced is homozygous red.